Well, hi, everybody. Welcome back to this is actually episode 94 of Speed Tips by Bob and Chad. Welcome to see all you guys tonight, and hopefully, we got good information and you got some great questions, and we'll be going along. What's uh, what's new and exciting at Weir's Machine?
Oh, we had a pretty busy Monday here. We got back from I was in Texas last weekend, and Billy was down by you, and so the trade show school sessions are rolling pretty good. Texas was awesome. We went down to Day Motorsports' open house, which they haven't had for I think 4 years since the old COVID virus or whatever, and so it was really awesome to get back down there and see all them guys. They do such a great job for us down there in Texas, and see all of our customers, and you got to eat some barbecue when you're in Texas. So we found
Sure.
Steve went with, so he was grinding meat church, and he found us an awesome place to eat barbecue. But yeah, it's good to get out there, and never fails. We come home with a few new product ideas, so great to get out there and see the customers, and support our team.
Awesome. Yeah, we had our first class of the year, our sport mod class or our two link class, full class. Great class. Guys were really good, had great questions. We actually went till 5 o'clock on Friday, and Saturday we went till 4:30. So we went long, which was perfectly fine. It was just like I said, we had lots of questions, and it was a terrific group. I mean, they I really enjoy that group. That's just of course, I kind of I like that sport mod class. I think that's a good class anyway. And her old buddy Cam Reamers put it on the boys down there at Casa Grande 3 in a row. That's pretty awesome. He's got 5 feature wins already this year. So that's pretty exciting. Yeah, that's real exciting. So that was pretty cool. And Dave's got a question. He says, "What made Cade Dillard so dominant at the Wild West Shootout?" I wouldn't have a clue.
He runs good parts on his car. I know that.
Yeah.
I talked to him today. He was pretty pumped. It was awesome to see him go out there and have a really good week like that. And then Gary Christian won in his car too. So Gary's a great guy. I really enjoy being around Gary. He's such a good dude, and it was cool to see him get a win out there too. But I talked to Cade. I said, "Have you been selling cars like crazy this week or what?" And he sold a few, but he's pretty tapped out. I mean, they can only build so many. He likes to race, so. But he definitely builds a very nice car, and he does a good job, and he's a really smart guy.
Cool. Yeah, no, I see one out there. It was pretty dominant, but yeah,
he almost got my bonus. If you win five, you got $15,000. So that's just it's an insurance policy. Everybody's like, "Oh my God, you're going to give away 15 grand," but it's they do it as an insurance policy. So you're the sponsor that sponsors the bonus. It's the same price as being a sponsor for the deal, but then it gives that class an option to win a big prize like that for pulling off 5. The late models have the same thing. That's a lot bigger amount, but it's cool to see that. I think Bobby won a bunch, or no, Bobby almost won 100,000, but he blew a tire, and Cade was one away from getting 15,000. So it's cool that them promoters out there do that. I mean, those insurance policies for big ticket deals ain't that expensive, and a lot of them touring series that have 4, 5, 6 nights. Maybe that's what the Dakota Tour needs to do to get some guys to go up there and run that. Have a bonus structure that if you win 3, you get this. If you win 4, you get this. If you win 5, you get that. And them insurance companies are all about selling gambles like that. So because most of the time they win.
And do you know who actually is who owns that Dakota Tour now?
Well, I talked to Robbie Roselli. He's in charge of Nodak, I think.
Okay.
So I think Gardner stepped down or whatever, and I think them racetracks are going to get behind it. I'm not really. I think they're still working on it. I know that Robbie called me and had some questions, about my involvement, and I offered up some pretty big ticket items, and so we'll see. I think there's a great group of people up there running awesome racetracks. I'm sure that they'll come up with a really cool plan, but it'd be pretty neat to get one of them insurance policies for big money to get some guys to go up there and take a chance of winning it.
Sure, you bet. Jeffrey wants to know the best placement for two-link brackets on the housing. How we actually originally done ours was we got it to the point where we put the hubs and rotors and everything on the housing, put the brake calipers on it, and then slid the brackets out as close to the tire as we could, which still it's about 12 inches in from the hub face is where it ends up being, is the center of that bracket. But I would get it as wide as you could. On MCA Sport Mount, I'm curious if you run the Torrington bearing in the right rear. Also, Chad, what cup would you run for the right rear with the Torrington bearing? The problem with the right rear, I like to run the Torrington bearing in the right rear, but sometimes they get, if you get the chain too tight where the Torrington bearing is most effective, you can end up getting a chassis height or a chassis hop out of the car with that right rear chain. So you got to be kind of careful. So we probably don't run one in the right rear like I wished we could. And then go ahead, Chad, with your new cups now, though, that's a possibility.
Well, yeah, the Torrington bearings are great, but any corner that the spring comes loose, and there's not tension on the spring at full hike or droop, then that bearing can float in there, and that's generally when we have problems with them, and they don't stay lined up, even if it is in an OD grab cup, so that theoretically keeps it lined up, but it comes down and snaps on them washers, and you end up breaking stuff. So we like to only run them in corners where you're staying tension. It's easier to keep tension on like a 4-link car on the right rear because you keep them loaded at hike when they're hiking down the racetrack. But most of the B mods come off the spring and get loose. So it's one of them deals where it's you really got to be careful. And like Bob said, over tightening the right rear chain is going to be a bad situation, and you'd be better off to not have the spring tight and have the Torrington bearing and have that problem. But the cups we run, even without the Torrington bearings, I would still run the OD cup just because it keeps everything lined up so good. And that'd be a 404 series. So we have a drop, a raised, and then a really deep, or a drop, and then our old standard, and then a raised from our old standard. So 3 different drops there with a 2-inch range to get you, playing with the old spring table to get that thing to have some motion. So I would measure your spring table and run the cups to give you the most advantage for the spring table.
Yeah, in the sport mod, probably the only actual place that we put one in is the right front, just because that in reality that's the only spring that's actually totally loaded. Because even the left front can come up off the spring a little bit if you don't have the the right link shock on there on a sport mod. I'd say. Well, Steve is watching, or Jerry and Steve. Steve says, daughter and I had a great time at your school this weekend. I appreciate that. Like I said, it was a great group. I was very pleased. They had great questions, and they were very in tune. I didn't have the fallen asleep ones. They were all pretty much really tuned into what was going on, and I thought it was an excellent group. I was very pleased with how the whole show actually went. Like I said, you could tell it was a good group because we went long, which normally we don't go long. So So that was pretty cool. Earl, right rear spring, I know it's been talked about and was wondering about your thoughts in the front, on top, or behind. See a lot of on top. That was one of the conversations that we had, a pretty good conversation about that in the school this weekend. Um, in the front is going to give you the most traction on that tire. On and behind will actually give you the most traction off the corner. But the problem with that is if you have the left rear in front and the right rear behind, it can get a little tight on you in the middle of the corner, right in that transition period where even though we're running a solid link, we still have quite a bit of rear steer in those cars. And like my simulator showed, we had 2.5 inches of steer in our explanation. The trend seems to be, and I know if you're in an IMCA sport mod, you have to have the spring on top of the housing, but in the trend seems to be running a lot of USRA guys are running that spring on top of the housing. And what that does, basically, it just loads the tire. You don't have any load coming into it with pinion angle movement or anything like that. It just sets up there. It drives real good. It doesn't do anything funny, and you kind of rely on the left rear for traction, and it seems to work pretty good that way. Dave says yes, he was going to ask about the bonus. Thanks for all you guys do. We appreciate it. Oh yeah. Earl says he runs a B mod. That like I said, that seems to be kind of the trend. In reality, it just doesn't. It just holds the car up. It doesn't do anything funny and just loads the tire. I mean, it just doesn't do anything. For the spring table on the rear end, where do you measure to and from to figure it out on a modified?
On a modified, it's going to be a coilover. So on a coilover suspension, it's where the coilover mounts to the chassis. So it's fixed location on the car, whether that's in a solid mount that's welded or on the tip of a screw jack adjustable style like some cars are built. So wherever that coilover hooks up, so you measure from the ground up to that center of that shock bolt on both sides when you're scaled, ready to go at ride height, and then generally we want the right rear to be 1 to 2 inches lower than the left rear.
John says, what will leading the right front with the lower control arm do? Well, in reality, you would think it would do the same as just having the stub put on the car with the right front lead and the left front back a little bit. It doesn't seem to actually. Well, my biggest concern would be depend on where you're racing and what sanctioning body you're racing under, because if we start moving that right lower control arm ahead, most of those sanctioning bodies don't think real keen about you changing those locations of those lower mounts, and plus they have a measurement from the from the frame to the lower control arm or to the lower ball joint. But in reality, what it'll do is it'll actually help turn the car in the corner a little better. When you got that right front leading that left front, the car turns a little bit better. Like our cars, we actually have the stub turned in our cars. It's actually 5/8 of an inch, half of it it's sucked back on the left and then ahead on the right. Will Weir's ever come out with a steering wheel?
No, sorry. Max Pappas and Joe Constance done a good job on that. No reason for me to get involved.
Jason, what do you recommend for starting bar angles? 4-link spring behind, left rear spring and shock together, UMP modified, also how much angle in the left upper at droop, standard bird cage, not zero indexed. Um, well, the angles, I mean, normally like we run the left lower, ends up, and that's an adjustable one. We end up running that so that it's about 7 degrees static and probably about 28 degrees static on the left upper. Right uppers usually are at about 18 degrees, and the left and the right lower is usually at about 2 or 3 degrees. Biggest thing is on the left rear, check it in dynamic, pull your right front spring out, jack the car up underneath the seat so that you're up against the chain. You don't want to be over 50 degrees. Actually, I like it to be about 48 degrees at hike, because at 48 degrees, you're still going to end up being about 50, because even though this is our best way of simulation, jacking it up underneath the seat isn't as accurate as putting it on a pull down rig, because you don't you don't lower the right rear like you should in true dynamic form. Earl, thoughts on left rear shock and front with next to spring B-mod? If rules allow it, I don't think that's a bad thing. The biggest problem is that spring takes up so much room that your shock kind of can end up being inboard or outboard too far, and you really kind of want to try to have the shock in line with the spring. So it seems to work better with it being behind, so that you can make sure your shock absorber runs pretty much in line with the spring. You're going to want to run with that B-mod. You're going to have a little bit straighter. Well, with that B-mod, you can actually run a slider up there, so you can run angle in your springs. We can't do that with a sport mod, but with a B-mod, you can run angle in the springs. So I'd recommend just putting it behind the housing. Justin, hey guys, love the streams in the Circle Track app. Where would you begin to free up a Southern Sport Mod on entry? Well, the biggest thing, all cars are very similar. It's just probably adding stagger to the car would be my best suggestion, to get the car to rotate a little bit more. Put a little bit more left rear bite in the car. That's going to definitely free it up on corner entry. It'll tighten it up on throttle, but it'll free it up on corner entry. If you can run, if they let you, run wheel spacers, you definitely space that right rear out. But of course, I don't think on a Southern Sport Mod, I don't think you can run wheel spacers like a Northern Sport Mod can't. That would be my suggestions there. On an A-Mod, what is the advantages or disadvantage of running a left rear brake floater?
Well, the brake floater helps the car in entry to get the car up and into motion. You can tune the angle of the rod to make it more or less effective, and that is probably more tunable than being clamped to the cage. So the disadvantage, I don't know if there really is one. I mean, I think it's an advantage no matter what. You use it, tuning it to get the car to rotate, get the car up is, trail braking is obviously really, I mean, the way you enter the corner. I had some guy ask me a couple weeks ago, like, what do I do if my guy can't get into trail braking? I said, well, you're going to have to teach the old dog new tricks, because that's one of the main advantages is keeping the car up on entry. And, the best guys in the country are doing it. So Brake floater versus clamp to the cage, it's a little bit more tunable. A clamp to the cage is more aggressive than running the extra arm. You can't tune it. It goes right through the 4-link rod. It's also connected to the coilover behind, so it has that extra leverage to help pick up and drop the car on the right front. So on the cage is a little more aggressive than the brake floater arm itself.
Isaiah wants to know what the benefits with the coilover on the rear end, on the right rear, behind. I'm assuming you're talking about behind, or on behind the rear end is definitely going to give you more traction off the corner, because as the car steers, it's going to try to unload that right rear, which in turn is going to force the car to load the left rear. And that runs, that definitely does good. The downside to that is sometimes it can be a little finicky on corner entry, because that transition where the spring's trying to unload the right rear and load in the left rear can actually make the car a little tight right in the middle of the corner, right when you first get back on the throttle. Now, I'm assuming you meant with it being behind the housing is what the question is. Austin, I'd run a shaft protector on my stock car, mainly just on the rear. The ricochet ones always seem to break off or shatter when the track gets heavy. Ever thought about making an aluminum one, Chad?
Well, I thought when we made the aluminum base, it made the ricochets not break as easy. I guess I wasn't sure. Or nobody says that they're breaking just the straight section, but maybe we got a problem there. I mean, I don't know if you see it, or I know when they were the first ricochet design where the bottom was plastic, they broke all the time, but we made the aluminum base, and I thought we fixed that problem.
Yeah, I don't know unless he has an older or some of the older ones. I'm not really sure. Don, I've always ran my springs and sliders on the front of the rear end and shock behind. Wasota B-Mod. Is there an advantage to run coilover setup instead? Well, the coilover setup is just, you just put everything together. The disadvantage is it's a little harder to change shocks, because, of course, if you change shocks, you got to take the spring off and change the shock out of there. And so that's the disadvantage to it. I just like running the spring and shock together. If I can't run that, the slider works really well with the shock behind, and I don't think there's a disadvantage or an advantage of either one. Biggest thing is making sure that you have either a coilover or a slider to mount your springs so that you get the full advantage of the spring location. Chad, sorry for the surprise you in the snowstorm the other week. Hope the team liked the donuts.
Yeah, that was awesome. Cody stopped in on his way home in the middle of the blizzard a week ago and dropped off some donuts right at closing, and it was good to see you. Thanks for stopping in. We should have gave you a little bit of a tour, but it was kind of a messy day.
Jared, I'm mounting my brakes on my 9-inch for my Camaro shock. Shock is behind the axle tube on the left and in front of the axle tube on the right rear. Where would you suggest mounting the calipers? It doesn't really matter where the calipers go, because it's not going to affect how the brakes actually work. The biggest thing, what I always recommend doing, is mounting them in the front of the housing so that my bleed hole is straight up. So it's a lot easier to bleed brakes and you get the air out of there. That seems to work really well. And that's kind of where we mount them, is in front of the housing. Jared, thanks again for all you guys do with these chats for everyone from California. Yeah, I know when I was down at Cocopah, I had a customer from California that talked to me a little bit and said that he watches the show, and so it's pretty unique. Whenever we get to go places, it seems like there's always somebody. I know there was some guys at the class last weekend that said that they always watch the show. So we enjoy doing it, and we like all the racers that we can possibly help out. Okay, Steve, where do you measure the spring table on a sport mod in the rear?
Second spring table of the night. I figured I better get the prints out. They're still here. So this is going back to the 4-link car or coilover car. Doesn't matter if it's a late model or a modified, but from the ground to the center of the mounting location is how you measure it at ride height, ready to go. So this shows you that the right rear is lower than the left rear. So this is kind of what we're looking for. So when you think about a teeter-totter and how that car rolls over, when that right side's lower than the left rear, the car can easily transfer over the top of itself. If it's the other way, and we're trying to roll over the top of that mounting location, then the car doesn't want to roll. So, when you want a car to be flatter, you'd have the right rear higher. When you want it to roll over, you'd have the right rear lower. On a spring and shock separate stock car / B mod, then you measure from the ground to the tip of the screw jack on both sides, and you want the left side or the right side to be lower than the left side. The springs also come into effect in this situation because you see if you run a shorter spring here, it's going to automatically move the screw jack down. So the location inside the spring cup and the spring are all in effect in a open coil setup like this with the shock separate. I believe I think these are on our technical documents on the website. We're working on something new here. We just expanded our marketing team too. So we got such a great group of guys here, but we're working on a new deal here that is going to be all the technical stuff for every part we make, whether it's a drawing, an assembly drawing, or technical stuff like spring table, things for the Ultra Force, our My Product videos explaining things. Everything that we do here is going to be thrown into one page on the site, and we're going to have a QR code that goes out in every order. So you can put that, we might make it a sticker so you can stick it on your toolbox, but you scan that QR code and then it'll take you right to that technical page on the website, and then you can search for whatever you have a question on, and it should be right there at your fingertips. So pretty excited about that.
Oh, that'll be nice. Okay, Travis, IMCA Sport Mod needs more drive off the corner. Do I reduce rear steer, turn on screw jacks, or could tuning with shocks be a better idea? I'll tell you what, shocks make a big difference, and I can't stress enough the fact that we've had really good luck tuning the cars with shock absorbers because, like I said, it definitely makes a big difference. Reducing the rear steer would definitely help. The downside to that is it might make the car a little throttle tight in the middle of the corner, so you have to be a little careful. You don't want to get that point where I'm a little tight getting in and I'm a little bit tight in the middle, because guaranteed if you're that, the car's going to be snappy loose coming off the corner, and you're not going to have any traction because it's going to snap loose on you. Turning screw jacks, you can definitely put a little bit more left rear bite in the car, that put a little more left rear load on it. That definitely can help. Now, doing that though, everything that you do on a car has an opposite and an equal reaction. So you really have to tune corner entry first, and then say what I can, say if you're just a tad bit snug getting into the corner, I'd put a little bit more bite in the car, because that's going to free you up getting in, and it's going to help traction the car up getting off the corner. So it just kind of depends on, what you want to do. But tuning with shocks is huge. I mean, the shock absorber industry, the way things have went, there's some pretty neat things there that can definitely help. Paul, why is it recommended to leave the left rear shock on when scaling if it's a gas shock? Well, the left rear shock adds, a gas shock will add about 20 pounds of bite in the car. So when you're scaling it in a static fashion, now once that car gets on the racetrack, it doesn't know it has that extra 20 pounds of bite in it because the shock will take a set and it's going. The left rear shock goes up and down pretty heavily. But if you don't do that, we've I used to always unhook the left rear shock. Well, then it seemed like, with these new deck height rules and all this other stuff, that left rear shock will, unless you let it set for quite some time, it can definitely raise the tail of the car up. And like I said, it will statically put 20 pounds of bite in the car. So that's what we have went to. Definitely unhook the front shocks. You don't want a shock holding down when you're trying to scale it. That right front with some of the 0 point stuff that we put in some of those shocks, they just make it a fright to scale it. It'd take you forever. For dry slick in an IMCA hobby, stiffer or lighter springs. Both sides are just one. I hate to. I'm going to have to study up on my hobby stock stuff because every time we get these questions, I don't have the answers for it. Boy, Tim, I really apologize for that. Feel free to give the guys at the shop tomorrow, give Brandon a call at the shop tomorrow, and he'll definitely take you through that and give you the actual what we actually recommend. I would tend to run in a hobby stock. I better not say. I could be wrong. You'd be better off to call a shop tomorrow, and Brandon or Troy could definitely help you out with that. Or actually, Braden in the shock room. He's kind of a hobby stock expert. He does a good job with hobby stocks. Cody, can you explain front stagger does? IMCA stock car. Front stagger will actually turn the car getting into the corner. Some guys play a lot with front stagger. Some guys run a lot of front stagger. They'll run 2 inches of front stagger. I normally suggest 1, but we've played with that. And on a racetrack, like on a real slick racetrack where you've got to really kind of crawl into the corner and keep the car real straight, more stagger in the front will turn the car just like it does in the rear. Even though they're not connected, it's still that tall tire rolls into the corner better and helps the car turn. Torrington bearing, best type of grease or no grease? If so, any particular type and reason why?
Well, I like a really thick grease just because it gives a dirt barrier. But as long as you keep it clean, maintenance it, and use I'd like to use a thick wheel bearing grease and not a real synthetic one that gets runny. Otherwise, Schaefer's has what they call it's a Molly chain lube. It's like spray it on, it kind of goes away, and it doesn't attract any dirt. That stuff, we've been having pretty good luck with that. We've been using that for a little bit on some cars. That stuff also works on your Heims and does a pretty good job there. But the Torrington bearings, run them on the top. Don't run them on the bottom because when you wash the car and the water sits in the cup and the water is your enemy, it's your friend and your enemy. So it cleans your car, but then it can also get into your bearings and really make life a living HE double hockey stick. So maintenance is something you really got to take care of, but I like a thicker wheel bearing grease or that spray lube.
Tanner, with soda modified, how much load and spring rate should a guy run in a 5th coil to get better traction on a dry slick racetrack? Well, I know there's guys all over the board on that. Normally a 250-pound spring seems to be a pretty good go to on that spring. And I would preload that spring probably a quarter of an inch so that you have some preload in it. That way it's always loaded, because you definitely wouldn't want that to unload on you. So I would definitely recommend that. That's kind of what I have seen over the year. Earl, Sport Mod 3 offset across the front. Say you change to a 2 right front and a 4 left front. More drive on the right front would change. What changes do you think you would add? Once again, 3 off across the front, and you say you change it to a 2 right front and a 4 left front for more drive off the right front. Well, actually, on a sport mod, you can't run a 2-inch offset wheel. You could definitely run a 4 on the left front, but you're going to be the rules are going to dictate that 3 off on the right front. You know, Ben Baker was telling us this weekend that that one of the schools that he went to had one of those new tire radar, and they tested some different things, and definitely the 4-inch wheel has the best fall off as far as flex of the wheel. It doesn't fall off at all, where the 2-inch and the 1-inch wheels have quite a bit of flex in them because of where the center of the wheel is in relationship to where the actual hub face is on the wheel. I thought that was quite interesting, because he said it was like a 30-pound difference on a 2-inch wheel. So I was quite surprised about that. Aries, how much load do you guys recommend in a slider? Well, it kind of depends on, I'm not sure completely what you're asking there. The left rear load, it kind of depends on the spring rate that you actually load to. If you're running a 100-pound spring, it's not uncommon to be in that 150 to 200 pounds of load. And that seems to work pretty well. Some of the lighter weight springs, you might end up having to run a little bit more. Heavier weight, you'd run a little bit less. Doug, does chassis hike affect spring table in the rear? And do you still set it at ride height and attitude?
So we're just looking for that initial motion to get into the corner. Obviously, when the car goes into the corner and it rolls into motion, then the right sides are going to be lower. So we're just trying to get that initial roll. So we really only care about static ride height. So that when you go into the corner and you let off, is the right front below the left front, and is the right rear, when you get to the rear transition, below the left rear, so that the car gets its attitude and roll easier and gets the motion going, is really only what we care about. When it's at attitude, obviously it's going to be that direction. We just want to help it get there quicker.
Jig, on a 3-link UMP Sport Mod, what's a good degree for left rear lower bar statically and dynamic? If there's no rules that force you into running a specific degree, I set my left rear bar at somewhere between 25 and 28 degrees static, and I like to keep it so that it's at that 45 degree in dynamic. Aries, if you could run a biscuit bar in a sport mod, would it be better than a solid bar? In my opinion, definitely, if a guy could run something, it would be a real stiff biscuit bar, because I wouldn't want it to move a tremendous amount. But if you could run a biscuit bar, it's going to give you more traction. It's going to be tunable traction. What's your opinion, Jed?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the most traction you got is with a solid bar, but the biscuits give you drivability. Not everybody has a a foot that they can control the power. So the dampening device allows you to dampen, the force that the engine is applying. So I would definitely run it if you could.
Cody said that's what they use on their bearings and their Heims.
Speaking of
So we
Heims,
got anything new at Weir's Machine that we want to show tonight?
well, they just keep setting stuff over here. I got all kinds of new stuff.
Awesome.
Last time we were so busy with questions, we didn't even get to talk about it. These are hot off the press. Just got these today. This is our new coilover wrenches for our 5-inch springs. So our wrench we had before, I didn't even really realize that we just made a really, sometimes I'm too cheap, and I'm sorry. I made that laser cut wrench for our 5-inch coilover kits, and a guy brought his stuff over for me to work on in the load machine. And I was like, what happened to your cup? And he's like, well, that's your wrench. I was like, oh. So I felt pretty dumb about that and instantly fixed the problem. So we got our new billet coilover wrenches for the 5-inch coilover kits, and we'll also have them for our 2.5-inch coilover kits. This is our new adjustable setup sticks. So these are just a quick adjust. We got the normal screw together ones where you got a threaded rod or whatever, but these just loosen and tighten with that pinch bolt there, so you can make a quick adjustment to your setup stick and reset that and go really quickly. And this guy is really big. I don't know if we can get him in there or not, but this is in our measuring plate family. This is a new one. So Jason Fager came to me and he said he wanted a bar that they can set their 4-link rods to the lengths that they're supposed to be. And then when they go to a racetrack, they're tuning on the car. And when they go to the next racetrack, they always start back square, back to their baseline. So they want to be able to take all 4 rods off really quick, put them back on these posts, and we put nuts on here so that they can tighten them up, and then they can actually tighten the bar on this jig and go right to the race car. So they take them off, they can put them on there. They're all preset. It's all lasered to the center to center. You can have your lefts on one side and your rights on the other. So just a cool little tool for another way to set your rods and be able to tighten it. Our normal measuring plate is so long, because we wanted to cover such a broad range. But when you go and try and tighten the arm on that bar flexes too much to be able to tighten the rod. So we just made this really cool one for doing your 4-link rods. So those are ready to rock now too. And my last new product for the night, which the new product board is full, all kinds of cool ideas. Like I said, we went to Texas, even brought home more ideas from there. So this is for your carb inserts, another hard case. So the boys are having a lot of fun with the hard cases. So that's, if you run our restrictor program, now you got a cool case to store those in so they don't get destroyed. So all kinds of new products on the list. We're really, that's why that printing of that catalog, what that thing's been out for 3 weeks, I think we got 10 new products already. So, but it's pretty cool. Can't stop the innovation. That's why we win.
There you go. That's the name of the game. Okay. Earl, on the front offset wheels, let's say you move it to the right, both sides 1 inch. What to expect? Basically, what you're doing when you do that, you're actually just changing your left side percentage. Basically you're statically moving. You're going to have a little bit more scrub factor, like if you go from a 3 to from a 3 to a 2-inch wheel, but I think that's pretty immaterial. It's mainly you're just basically moving the load, the center of your car to the left side, because you're getting more load on that left front and more load on that right front. So it's just basically increasing your left side percentage. But the car will drive into the corner. I'm a little bit concerned about sometimes when you raise or increase left side percentage, it doesn't roll on the right front. And the other thing too is when you move that right front tire the further you move that right front tire away from the engine, the more it's going to, or it's going to have less load on it. So the car's not going to load the tires much. So it can make the car a little bit tight where the front end's not tractioning up like you would think it should. Hey, Bob and Chad, what do you think about a 2-inch bump stop on the right front shock? Forgot to ask that question at the two-link school. Well, IMCA Sport Mod, you can't run a bump stop. And I'm not. Are you familiar with the other rules are? I'm not sure what USRA.
I'm not
I
100%
don't
sure.
think you can.
I don't think you can either. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think you can run bump stops. The downside to a bump stop is it has some good things about it, but it also gives you another place where something can malfunction. Unless you know what you're doing with a bump stop, that's just a whole new can of worms.
Yeah, personally, I just talked to a guy that raced out in New Mexico, and he had a conversation with me, and he's like, I don't know if this is right. Well, he was on the soft spring with the bump stop and kind of the trend, whatever. And the problem is when you run the soft spring, if you can't tie the car down, you get the ride height messed up, and you're trying to run a soft spring, so your ride height sucks, your roll center sucks. You got a soft spring and you're riding around a bump stop, and you have no rate to transfer to the back. So he's like, I have no traction. I'm like, well, you shouldn't, because bump stop racing with soft springs is all about turning. It's not about traction. So that's why asphalt cars run them. But a lot of guys are fast with them, but it's to tune that stuff is ridiculous. It takes so much data. It's crazy. And no bumps in the track.
Right. No doubt. Colton says it will tighten the, evidently those wheel offset changes, he says it will tighten the car up on corner exits. How do you measure pinion angle on a 3-link quick change? I've heard 2 places for the angle finder, the gear case, and on the bottom side. Which is correct? I also heard you run less angle than you would with a 9-inch. What's your thoughts? I think the angle is still the same. The biggest thing is you've got the with a quick change, you're an inch. Your pinion's an inch and a half or an inch and a quarter lower than what the 9-inch Ford was. So you're going to have more angle in your drive shaft, and that's probably why some guys, say they maybe run a little bit less angle, a lot less pinion angle. And I would go off the cover. Most all those covers are machined back there, and I would definitely go off the cover, or the cover area would be my place to go to set pinion angle. Greg, what does moving the pull bar left to right do on the rear end, and where should you start? IMCA A-Mod. I always start in the center and probably angle it to the point where 1 inch to the front, where it's a little bit of an angle towards the right front. You don't want to get too much angle. The old theory was that you could run a lot of angle, it would load the left or load the right front more, which it will. The downside to it is anytime you get a lot of angle in something, you can't control what's actually going to happen, because sometimes it'll try to move to the right or move to the left, or it's just going to be could create an inconsistency. I always start in the center. Like I said, the center seems to work good, and then I angle it 1 inch towards the right front. So the front of the pull bar is actually a 1 inch to the right, and the back of the pull bar is in the center of the rear end. Race driver, heard some rumors about copper wire in left rear wheels for traction. Well, I wouldn't have a clue about that one. I mean, if you could have a heavier wheel, in theory, that does give you more traction because you're loading that tire more. The downside to that is the excel and decel. Your rotating weight's going to be heavier, so it can carry you into the corner. It can, have less, which might be a good thing. Have a little bit less coming off the corner, so it doesn't try to spin that tire. I would think it would be a little bit tricky to get that all balanced in there. I mean, having a balanced setup with wire and that. Yeah, I have no idea. Never heard of that. But lots of things I've never heard of, so I guess that's okay. To me, it sounds like it would be smoke and mirrors, but whatever. What's the best trailing arm length on a 4-bar modified? Go ahead, Chad. There's quite they're all over the board, but 15 and 17 seems to be pretty consistent.
15, 17 is like, I think them are the two most popular bars we sell, 12 and 14s. Some guys are going really long on the left rear when they're running the massive hike to slow that transition, but 15, 17 is still pretty popular.
Oh, Nick says that Wasota is allowing it.
For a bump stop?
A bump stop. Well, I won't comment on that.
Yeah, well, don't rely on it.
Yeah, you could waste a month of racing tuning on a bump stop. I mean, I don't know. I don't think it's something that is needed. The IMCA Sport Mods left rear spring smash. How much you smash the spring? I was told 3 inches. I tried it. Problem is my deck height was 3 inches too high and no traction, spin the tires. Well, is a little bit. Anytime you go with that 3-inch spring smashed, you definitely have to go with a lot lighter spring. If you were smashing that spring 3 inches, you'd have to be 80 to 100 pound spring. And once again, the traction on the left rear is really in your trailing arm. It's not so much on the spring itself. What that spring's supposed to do is get more hike, which in turn, or get hike sooner, which in turn loads the left rear lower trailing arm and keeps the angle in that trailing arm, so that it's trying to push forward on the chassis and down on the wheel to give you more traction. Just looked on Weir's website and cannot find the Jan's Fager 4-bar product, number and price.
That's unacceptable. They're not supposed to bring products over here to my table unless they're on the site. I think they're $150. It's WM 425.
Steve said it's coming soon. Probably be available this week sometime.
There's going to be a meeting in the morning about that. Yeah, they'll be on the site tomorrow. Promise. Otherwise, call us and order one in the morning.
Do you know what the price is?
$150, I think.
Okay. Daniel West says, "Hey Bob, I'm glad to see you on here, Daniel." Jay Garvey, will last weekend's two-link class be available on DVD with the book? Thanks in advance. Great show, guys. Definitely that will be available. It's probably going to be 45 days before we get that actually put together, because We've got a college intern that's working on that, and he can only work about 20 hours a week. But yes, it will be available on DVD, and we'll keep everybody informed. Rex Merritt says barbed wire gives the tire more traction.
Just wrap it around it.
Yep, just wrap it around it. Yeah, that'd be exciting. Adam, what effect taking turns out and putting turns in to a B mod on sliders with a 100-pound spring with a 2 inches of preload? Well, you're taking turns out. You're going to take some preload out of it, which is going to take some left rear bite out of the car. Adding turns to it, you're going to put more preload on it, which you're going to actually increase the preload, which is going to put more bite on that tire. I caution once again, like I said, with these cars nowadays, you got to really watch that deck height because, man, they're like at Boone on Saturday nights. That's one thing they check all the time is that deck height, and so you got to be really careful that you're not flirting with a problem there. These questions keep coming here. There's a second here. I lose my spot.
Colton,
what's the benefit of running a heavy left rear axle tube? Well, the benefit is on a smooth, slick racetrack, it's going to give more load on that left rear tire. The downside is on a rough racetrack, you're going to have more of an unsprung weight issue that could cause the car to be, catch the hole and not want to come up across. It could be a handful in a rough racetrack is what I'm trying to say. Tanner says, any open spots for the chassis school at the Close Racing Supply School? I'm really sorry, Tanner. There is not any open spots. That class is sold out. And
how about yours? How about the one in Ames?
The one in Ames, the 4-link school in 2 weeks. So we still have plenty of room for that one. We're not sold out on that one. That class is always a little smaller, which is a good situation. It gives us more one-on-one time with the customers and stuff, but it tends to be a little bit smaller. The stock car school is filling up at the end of February. And like I said, the race tech school out there in Pennsylvania, or at Joel's place, Close Racing, that definitely filled up quick. I think we've got 5 people on the waiting list. You can definitely call in and put your name on the waiting list in case we get some cancellations. James, thank you. Hope I didn't get anyone in trouble.
I don't yell that loud. It'll buff.
Any open? Let's see here. With the new hobby stock ride height rule, I'm running your lower control arm set up, and my ride height with myself in the car is 6 3/4 on the driver's side. How do I get that up to 7 inches? Once again, I'd call the shop tomorrow and ask to talk to Braden or Brandon or Troy. Those guys have a lot more knowledge on the hobby stock thing. I feel bad. Like I said, I just haven't. I'm not that knowledgeable on the hobby stock stuff. Okay. Typically, if I move my panhard bar at all, I just move the rear end side down about a half an inch. I'm wondering if moving the whole bar down and keeping the angle, how it would affect not handling the car. If you move the whole bar down, you're actually lowering the roll center. So it's definitely going to tighten the car up on corner entry. Not having as much, not having as much angle will actually load both tires more equally, where with a lot of angle in it, you tend to load the right rear tire a little bit more. So that would be something to kind of keep in mind. Now Adam's even asking me on the new ride height rule for the stock car. I'll tell you what, we're going to get Mr. Berger on here in 2 weeks, and he can answer all those questions about those ride heights in those classes, because, of course, B&B chassis man, he should know all those answers. So give me a couple of weeks, and I'll have somebody on here with us that'll give us all the scoop. I knew they changed that ride height, but like I said, I've not been involved with what they're actually doing to get these things done. I know Troy's talked about it, and the information didn't stick. Thanks, Rex. I'll go to the hardware store and get some barbed wire and grit sandpaper. Should prep wire with it, definitely. Okay, our last question of the night. Eris, do you want a good amount of camber in the left front, or just enough to keep the tire flat at attitude? You want to, in dynamic, you want to keep the tire flat. The key is making sure that the tire has full contact on it. We run about 4 degrees. If you're running a stock car, that's kind of a disadvantage, because the way that the jack bolt is in those cars and the way their rules say, it's a little difficult to get the camber in there that you want to. But I do know with the new ride height rules, these cars are not hiking up near like they were. They've kind of taken that equation out of the situation. Down there at Kokopah, the cars were actually a little more flat because of that. Well, we'll be back here in 2 weeks, and let's see here. What's 2 weeks? Today's the 22nd. It'll be February 5th. Be right after our chassis school. We've got the modified 4-link school, February 2nd and 3rd, and of course Chad's going to be there. Ben Baker will be there. Of course, Bobby and myself, and then we will probably have Brandon on the panel. So once again, there's room in that class. If anybody wants to come to that 4-link class, there's a lot of information to be had there, and it's a nice class. And like I said, the size is not going to be super huge, so it'd be a great class to come to. Alrighty. You guys all have a great weekend and enjoy the weather that we're having here in the Midwest, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thanks, everybody.